Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us here today, whether or not you are live or on the replay. I want to thank you for joining us, Cognify Solutions, at this webinar. We will be discussing AI incident response and safety, contain, triage, and learn. This webinar is brought to you by Cognify Solutions. Here at Cognify Solutions, we are dedicated to ensuring that our clients and our stakeholders, the world at large, is able to use AI systems well, able to use them effectively, ethically, and in tandem with the human agency, and not as a replacement. We firmly believe that governance is not a bolt-on after the fact box to tick, but it is something that can be strategic and will actually give you a strategic differentiator over your colleagues, over your competitors. Our agenda today will be to discuss our main topic. All right, if we're going to be cutting this, I might actually just stop and give some clean cuts. All right, our agenda today will be to discuss what happens when AI fails. What does incident response look like with AI solutions? We will be anchoring some of our discussion around some recommendations from ISO 42001 and pairing that with what that looks like after something happens. A lot of these governance frameworks are prescriptive and give you details what happens up to the event and a little bit of guidance after. We want to be able to give you some actionable information and actually encourage you to consider and ponder and think, what does this actually look like if something happens? Generally speaking, right after that's also a good time to revisit how can we press further into that particular framework or standard. This is why we are here.
Yes.
All right, without further ado, let me
ISO 42001 says we need controls to detect and stop unintended behavior preemptively. So do we have monitoring in place to catch issues in real time or before they happen?
That is an excellent question and point we will explore. An ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. All right.
It's an old doctor's tale.
Yeah.
Unless that ounce is an ounce of vodka, then I'm not sure it prevails.
In this case, I would strongly suspect that ounce of vodka will not be as much as a governance boon as one might hope. But let's share this presentation. Okay.
Depends on what ails you.
Depends on what
who you
ails you
ask.
indeed. All right. Incidents aren't theoretical. They are inevitable. Your response framework determines whether or not they become catastrophes or catalysts for improvement. Next slide, please. Now, why are they inevitable? Even the most sophisticated AI systems will experience failures. In October 2023, Cruise Robotaxi, they had a collision. And this served as a stark reminder even deep-pocketed innovators fall when governance lags behind innovation. And if you don't recognize the name, there's a reason for that, because the type of accident they had was severe. We will mention this and a few others as an example. Without a structured incident response framework, organizations face regulatory penalties, reputational damage, and erosion of trust, all of which could have been mitigated with proper preparation. Again, an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. All right, let's go to the next slide. So over the next, let's say about 25 minutes, we're going to go over the framework we use for incident response, contain, triage, and learn, which is similar to the NIST incident response framework. We will discuss real-world applications and go over a couple of case studies. We will discuss what 42001 brings to the table, and even to help model incident response plan. Of course, what that looks like when you bring that into prevention rather than just cure. And of course, an action plan where we'll go over a little bit of a self-assessment and talk about some immediate steps you can take to strengthen your governance posture around your AI systems. All right, let's go on to the next slide. Here we go. All right, contain, triage, learn. Contain. When something happens, one of the first things you're going to have to do is attempt to eliminate that harm. This is rather critical with AI systems because they have an element of independentness to them. They are fairly autonomous in their artificial intelligence. So we want to attempt to isolate and notify and prevent them from escalating. We want to do this before we really get into the triage process because, again, like having a live attacker inside your system, you want to eliminate that capability for it to do further harm as early as possible. Again, this may consist of simply if this is a chatbot, taking it offline. If this is a agent embedded in a robotic system, pulling power. If this is something that's part of a integral business process that your people are feeding data in, tell them to stop feeding data into it, or if it's serving customers, stop using it for responses. Whatever is the primary in and out or mechanism of that to interact with its environment, you want to contain that immediately. The next step would be then to triage. Once we've attempted to eliminate the immediate harm, then we can start on our diagnostic process. We can start to attempt to capture the scope, limit any further harm if we've missed something, and then start to understand the scope of remediation. And this will often be based on that risk level. If this is simply pulling a chatbot offline, part of this remediation may just be not having that on the website until such time as we can evaluate what is in its training set or what users may have gotten access to that shouldn't have. If this is more severe, such as a AI system in a robotic system or something that actually affects its environment physically, then remediation for that is going to be perhaps rendering first aid. Perhaps that's calling in a repair team. I think they're a question.
Yeah, I think those are great points, but there's also a human component because one of the things we were just talking offline a little bit about this earlier is that in the AI context, ultimately the human is still ultimately responsible for the compliance and the accountability that AI is being used appropriately, ethically, and integrously within either the personal use or enterprise level use. So questions like interviewing human beings, did you override a safeguard? Did a prompt or a data set trigger something unexpected or inappropriate? So that has to be factored into the equation because there's now a term for this. It's called shadow AI. People who are using AI in the business place, possibly even with their own personal instruments that are breaking with compliance and rules within the organization, exposing data, which is exactly what we're talking about today. This whole notion of and causing incidents. In many cases, organizations aren't aware because they're doing this outside of the network. They're doing this outside of the confines of the organization. Human beings are definitely, historically we know, they're invariably the cause of most of our challenges. Not the equipment, but just like a carpenter never blames his tools, that should be the same standard in AI usage.
Indeed. Absolutely. No, that's a fantastic point. Thank you, Richard. And part of that root cause analysis is going to be, was this an AI system that was under governance at all? Was it part of the designated posture, the official posture of the enterprise? If it wasn't, that's going to make this process a lot more fraught, but all the more important to go through with intentionality to really start to dig down into, well, what What was the nature of that? And I would dare say here at Cognify personally, that's an intrusion. If that is an unauthorized shadow AI system, that really should trip certain intrusion alarms and certain intrusion response procedures. And that really allows you to go back and consider, all right, well, that's intrusion. Who was the actor? An excellent question. One of the reasons why we need to be a more intentional about our response procedures, understanding that may not always be a human immediately that we can easily tap on for responsibility. That may be an automated system. And it may be an automated system that a human brought in purposely or innocently. But regardless, it's now doing something that has increased our risk posture, put us on our back foot, and caused some type of harm, some type of reputational risk that is in progress. All right.
And the
And
parallels to cybersecurity, I'm
Mhm.
sorry, your screen froze, so I thought you had paused. The
Okay.
parallels to cybersecurity are very much the same. A lot of those incidents are caused by humans opening emails that they shouldn't have and exposing viruses for malware, ransomware, whatever, to the network. And the same thing can happen with shadow AI uses of AI.
Indeed. Most certainly. Once we start to discover this and we've attempted to begin the remediation process, we can really start to knuckle in and press into the learn aspect of this cycle, where we need to carefully document these systems. We need to implement corrective actions, feed these insights back into the governance frameworks that we should be implementing. Again, to summarize this, contain, stop the bleeding, protect the stakeholders, triage, verify the scope, the root causes, and obligations, and learning. We want to take those lessons and prevent reoccurrence. And all of this does sit on the backbone, the foundation of a governance framework, not just ISO 42001, which we will touch on, but in this aspect, this is mirroring NIST SP 800-61 regarding incident response, and where continuous improvement and rapid dissemination, lesson sharing, rapid dissemination of this process is critical. All right. Again, part of, as you mentioned, Richard, that part of that cybersecurity principle, we're bringing this back into the AI domain. All right, let's go on to the next slide. All right, now in this, where ISO 42001 meets this cycle, because ISO 42001 doesn't necessarily define exactly what your incident response plan is going to look like, but it is going to have certain things to say about that and certain things that can immediately be reflected back into that. And again, if you're not currently using 42001, this is an excellent time to examine that as you examine your risk positions, your risk procedures, incident response procedures for such an event. All right. So for the contain process, clause B.8.4 in 42001 specifies communication requirements, where organizations must pre-plan who is told what and when for AI-specific events. If you are following the 42001 specification, this is a critical part of it. This is a control that you should not be skipping on. Because ultimately, informing your stakeholders of what's going on is important to respecting their agency and acknowledging, really limiting your liability. Because in most jurisdictions, in most situations, certain amounts of liability do go up if you do not notify the affected parties. This is very true in a lot of financial related breach events. PCI DSS card network disclosures do come to mind.
Yeah. One of the things
HIPAA
about,
as well.
sorry, Chris, one of the things about ISO 42001 is it says that we do need controls to detect and stop unintended behavior. So it raises the question, do we have these monitoring controls in place to catch issues in real time, as I mentioned earlier? Because if you don't, then triage, ultimately the next step becomes much more challenging, let alone finding out where you
Absolutely.
need to contain it.
Absolutely. We're laboring under the presumption that something about, and to be fair, I will actually speak on this for a quick second. It is easy to labor under the presumption that we are here having this hypothetical situation where the incident has already happened because you haven't implemented 42001. You can do everything perfect and still fail. That is not necessarily your fault. That is life. Any business owner here, I'm sure, is probably shaking your head right now. Now, so one of the things about that, however, is that if you have already implemented 42001 and this has happened, you now have a lot of those points that you just mentioned, Richard. You now have a lot of that framework to fall back on and update and reevaluate and then go through that cycle and improve. That really should help you get back up on your feet faster and complete this cycle more efficiently.
And
It
you're also going to know where to look a lot faster, and
indeed,
you'll have data on where where it happened, where the breakdown was. Without
absolutely.
ISO 42001, that's a little more problematic.
Nail on the head indeed. For the triage step, clause 6.1.2 does speaks a lot on risk assessment. And this, quite to your point, Richard, if you have completed this particular aspect of the 42001, then you will be able to go through everything in very checklist fashion. What was the risk? Where did we exceed that? What was the evidence of the last assessment that we did? Is that evidence still accurate, or was there a gap? Was there a failure in that? Was there a failure in that particular system that we attested to? If you have 42, again, if you have 42001 in place, this would be a more efficient process. If not, this is actually not a bad spot to really start documenting some things you can use to ensure that to begin your compliance with this standard. That leads us on to the learn aspect of this process, clause 9.1 and 10.1, which is performance measurement and continuous improvement. This ultimately helps close this loop. Monitoring, measurement, analysis, again, continuous improvement protocols, that's an essential part of any governance framework. Any governance effort that you implement, it is important that you collect your findings, analyze, synthesize, and implement and adopt them. Otherwise, you have a leaky funnel, as it were. All
And
right.
there's also an element too, Chris, where we share the results with a wider team, vendors, or even publicly to get their input.
Yes.
And because in the event of a breach, as we all know, lack of transparency builds mistrust. The corollary to that is transparency
Absolutely.
builds trust or can restore some trust.
Absolutely. It's something that I would say is rather critical and is one of the most difficult things to do because now not only do you have to, at least from a publicity aspect, PR aspect, not only have you needed to now inform your stakeholders, clients, employees, shareholders that you've had a breach. Now we're talking about going to talk about it publicly. But truly, history bears this out time and time again, and more recently in recent history, when a company, an organization, an entity stands up and says, yes, this happened to us. This is how this happened to us. These were the lessons learned. These were how we were able to implement safeguards. And this is what we're now sharing with everybody. This now becomes part of the zeitgeist. This now becomes part of the collective knowledge. This now enables the entire industry to move forward a little bit more secure. And not only that, this does nothing but improve your credibility among your peers, at the very least in the certain cybersecurity, information security, AI security circles, but also among peers and stakeholders generally, because those who take responsibility trust and more responsibility tends to be given to them. Is there another question?
Not for me, other than all of this information that we're collecting should be fed back into the model design for testing and monitoring going forward as we're updating our risk assessment and our statement of account applicability or training protocols. So all of this is, to your point, all this becomes really a crucial part of the learning process and can extend beyond our own
Indeed.
company, but can become part of best practices industry-wide.
Indeed. Absolutely. So concluding, if there's any further questions, please feel free to just jump in. But concluding on this cycle, ISO 42001 provides a structural framework that transforms reactive incident handling into proactive governance. Organizations that align the response strategies with these clauses will be audit ready while minimizing operational disruptions. Fantastic. All right, you can continue on. Next slide. Oh, one moment, please. There we go. Contain. Oh, one moment, please. Here we go. Contain. Communicate fast, communicate right. Case study in Cruise. They had an incident where one of their robo-taxis captured, I won't go into too much details, but caught someone who was exiting the vehicle, I believe, and had no immediate way for such a pedestrian or anyone else to emergency stop that vehicle. It went off on its way on an automated path, pulling this person behind them. One of the humongous problems about this wasn't merely that it happened, which is tragic enough, but we point this right back to an aspect of the standard. Disclosure was significantly delayed. It took them over half a day, 18 hours, to even report it back to the DMV and other appropriate authorities. As soon as this is in California, as soon as the California DMV found out, they suspended their license. And they ended up racking up at least $8 million in regulatory penalties. And if I'm not mistaken, they did not recover. You haven't heard that name today.
Yeah.
Clause B84 requires documented communication protocols, clear stakeholder notification timelines, and transparent disclosure standards.
Yeah,
Minutes met.
usually I know
Yes.
from the, sorry to interrupt, but from the cybersecurity space or even network space, there are usually service level agreements in terms that govern response times. I'm not sure if that exists in the AI realm or within 42001, but immediate response within an hour, then follow up within 4 hours, subsequent follow up within 8 hours. There's a standard, a service level agreement standard. Is that encompassed in 42001, or is that more akin to cybersecurity networks, InfoSec,
That
or
would be
those
its
kind of things?
No, that's an excellent point. 42001 would help establish a new timeline, very similar in operation to some type of SLA. Essentially, in BA4, part of those communication, those stakeholder notification protocols would be decided and documented and verified. So if that particular organization, such as a autonomous vehicle company, determines that they have regulatory authority requirement to report, that is now part of their procedures documented according to B84. So if say Cruise was following 42001 and they realized they had a statutory requirement for reporting of AI system failures within, let's say, 4 hours or less, then that's now part of their documented procedures as required by 42001. So if they happen to be properly adhering to this, probably wouldn't have happened to them, hypothetically speaking. All right, let's look at our next case study. Triage, data bias under the microscope. Amazon's AI hiring tool failure. Indeed, the company experimental AI recruiting tool showed preference for male candidates in technical roles, rejecting qualified women during training drawing data bias from historical hiring patterns. That would have been a significant amount of egg on Amazon's face. Believe this was not with one of the more modern AI tools we have. This happened back in 2014, but bias in the data sets you're training these systems with is still important to be aware of and to monitor.
Yeah.
All right. My notes here we go. Yeah, after training on historical data from a decade of resumes, it began to systematically disadvantage women applicants for technical roles. This algorithm penalized resumes that included references to women's colleges, or activities, perpetuating biased outcomes due to skewed training data. This is an example where it's important to go back and realize where the compliance gap would be. Again, clause 6.1.2 illustrates this. Amazon lacked structured risk assessment protocols that would have flagged gender distribution anomalies in results before deployment. Without proper triage procedures, the problem persisted until manual review revealed the pattern. This is also one of the largest issues with not having a structured response framework in place. When you have a harm, you may have inadvertently mitigated a harm if you roll back or if you happen to not use that system on a continual basis. But it's important to routinely analyze the potential harm there. It's important to go back and routinely analyze what the potential governance failures there, and especially with bias, to measure results over time, to measure performance over time, because and this is not the only example where this has happened. This helps to illustrate and illuminate where you may have missed a governance gap to begin with.
And this is
And
another
again,
prime example where there was a human involved, because
yeah,
LLMs are trained. They're trained by their information source. Any bias that is inherent in an LLM is one that it acquired by those humans that contributed towards defining what consists of that LLM. So this bias did not happen through happenstance. It was intentional, and it was premeditated, sorry. I'm feeling
hypothetically,
premeditated right
I
about
don't think
now.
they were brought up on charges for that. But yeah, it's definitely a situation where there was a cost to that governance failure. Amazon ultimately abandoned that project entirely after they invested significant sums. They suffered reputational damage, it's now a textbook case study, and potentially missed qualified candidates, all preventable with proper triage protocols. All right, and learn. Let us continue to examine how we can learn from some of these. On this particular, presentation's cut off a little bit. This case study is one involving an AI that McDonald's was using. So in June 2024, McDonald's canceled its IBM-powered AI voice ordering system after repeated embarrassing errors, such as erroneously adding huge numbers of items to orders and confusing customers, which were widely publicized online. This clearly illustrates the need for ongoing quality management. Make sure you're monitoring your metrics.
Is this the supersize me hallucination? Is that what it was? Is that what it was?
I'm not aware of that specific hallucination. Aware of the movie, aware of the movement, but not of a named AI hallucination. But that's interesting. I may have to look that up, see what that is. No, but this is clearly an example where the need for ongoing monitoring, measuring the metrics of what was going on in this system and how this happened, and quality controls and deployment validation are necessary as part of this. Because one of the things about this particular case is that this system was in place for some time, and this had to show up after this had been deployed in the field to clients in a production environment, in a field environment. Clauses of in ISO 42001, clauses 9.1 and 10.1 specifically call out ways of which that continuous improvement process is 9.1 and 10.1 call out specific ways in which such metrics and continuous improvements is required as part of this framework, as part of your implementation of this particular framework. One of the things this would clearly help mitigate is preventing such quality escapes, I believe is the term, from getting into the field and impacting your customers for so long. So I would then posit this as we go through as we've gone through each one of these case studies. Could your organization, your company, your firm have spotted this particular case in production before Twitter does? If these are all client facing, all of these happen to escape out to the field or out into the public, could your quality management, could your governance system have spotted these before you find out about it from social media?
Yeah,
That
I mean,
is one of the biggest things.
what comes to mind in this specific case is how many times have you ordered through one of these audio things and the order taker repeats your order back to you? So if that had been the case here, if somebody ordered a burger with fries or a Happy Meal or whatever those things are, and they ended up with 3 Happy Meals, 5 orders of fries, that would have been detected. And the AI could have simply repeated back the order to them, and the user could have said, no, I didn't order that. Let me give you a correction.
Indeed.
I think part
A
of
human
in
in
that
the loop.
same example, I think part of that attempt to mitigate stuff like this is that they have that little automated board, so you can review your meal or whatever
Mm-hmm.
you order, which sometimes can be glitchy, but I think that's an attempt to stop that from being an issue. So
Right.
it's like part of that onus is on you. Make sure what's on the board is what you're asking.
Right.
Indeed. Now, a bit of a exercise. In this case, I would encourage everyone to complete this assessment. Considering the size of our group, I'd encourage everybody to complete this assessment and perhaps send it to us over email, especially if you're watching this on the replay. But for each of these categories, consider your position and give yourself a score of 0 to 3. All right. So for the containment, readiness level 1, should be readiness level 0, perhaps. Do you have no incident communication plan? That's a score of 0 for that. That's okay. That happens. Do you have an ad hoc communication plan? Probably do. That's a score of 1. Do you have documented protocols? Is this written down? That's structured. That's a score of 2. Have you tested your communication and reporting system? Are some of these set up to automated alerts if a quality escape happens to be noticed in an automated fashion? That's optimized. Give yourself a 3. The triage step. Do you have no way of systemically assessing your risk posture? That's a 0. That's unprepared. That's okay. That's why you're here, right? Or do you happen to have manual but inconsistent assessment procedures? Okay, better than nothing. That's a 1. Do you have an established, written down methodology of risk assessment and root cause analysis of what to do when you're in the middle of an incident? That's structured. All right, cool. Or do you happen to have a comprehensive framework in place that you're following, like one of the NIST frameworks that you've gone through, that is established? And if you've done that, Well, congratulations. That's optimized. That's a 3. And finally, onto the learn aspect, these what you're doing at the end of that incident cycle. Once you go through an incident, is that just it? You just wipe your brow, hit the bar? I don't think anybody would blame you too much for that, but that's not an improvement mechanism. So that would be a 0. Or do you actually try to do a postmortem from time to time, anyhow? You're making an effort. That's a 1. Or do you ensure that anytime there's an incident, you're doing regular review, no matter the size, big or small? You're sitting down and attempting to understand what happened and why and what to do about that. That's structured. Give yourself a 2. Or are you ultimately doing these regular reviews and pushing those lessons learned back into your fulfillment process, back into your operations process, back into your systems process, whether that's AI or anything? Are you ensuring that you have a continuous improvement loop? By golly, that's a 3. Congratulations. I see a raised hand.
I didn't want to interrupt as you were going through the self-check. So let's say that you are a small business and you have no idea about any of these things, but you're here and you want to implement this. How do you go about making sure, one, understanding what it is that you need, and two, how do you access the things that you need or put together plans so that you can cover all your bases?
Oh, I think you went on mute.
That was the end of the question.
He's done.
Oh. So I'm just going to repeat the question, make sure I heard that. So that say you're a small business owner, and fantastic. Thank you for coming here. We're glad to have you. That's not a problem. But you don't quite know what your real positioning is in all this, but you're trying to figure out what your next steps are. Is that fair?
Yes.
All right. Well, that's actually a perfect question. We're definitely here to try to help educate you, give you some tools, and to provide some next steps for you. All right. As if you happen to go through this and you can't even give yourself zeros, you're wondering do you even measure this in your organization? I would encourage you to go ahead and reach out to us so that you can book a complimentary consultation. I will show that those links are put into the chat now. And with that, again, first consultation, first meeting, we're actually going to just give you some good guidance, understand where you are as you understand it, and attempt to communicate what a good next step for you might be, and if you can take that with us. Sometimes we'll have conversations with folks around their AI systems and understand that, hey, the way you have that set up, you're okay for right now. Here's some general guidance. Let us know if you reach that threshold. Other folks, I believe there's a highly technical term I would describe some folks' situation as a hot mess. If they are a hot mess, that's okay. We'll have that conversation. Our guidance and recommendation to you might be a little bit more urgent, but we're going to be here to help you and assist you regardless. All right. And unless there's any further questions, that concludes this presentation. I know we may have come up on time, so I thank you. If any questions that you've put in chat that I may have missed, I thank you for them. We're going to try to collect them and respond to them offline. Again, thank you so much for your time, for your attention, and remember that there's a quote I wanted to leave you on. Incidents will happen. Preparedness is optional, but consequences aren't. Talk to us today and let us have a conversation on how we can perhaps mitigate some of those consequences.
Take
Thank you
care,
so
everybody.
much.